Go for it.
Hello, everybody. Let's get some energy levels up here. Okay. Value for value and pod ping. Haven't got value for value up there. I spent almost no time on my slides, okay? So I'm glad that the screen is a little less gigantic than yesterday's IMAX monster. I want to talk about pod ping, but pod ping is not as sexy as the value for value Lightning Hive bridge that more of you probably know about, and that's my current funded proposal. But I've got a little bit of extra time, so I'm just going to say a few words about value for value. So there's no real slides for this. It's quite simple, and I gave this talk at the last HiveFest in virtual reality, where I was a funny little avatar with my arms too high because I made the mistake of wearing goggles while sitting on an office chair. Don't ever do this, because what happens is your arms are up here and you look like this kind of weird puppet thing with arms in the wrong place. So tip for virtual reality presenting. Anyway, it's better to be in person. Value for value, what I've built is v4v.app. You go there, what you can do is, with Hive, you can buy or send Lightning. I'll explain what Lightning is in a minute. Or you can receive Lightning and get Hive or HBD. It's as simple as that. What is Lightning? Lightning is what the Bitcoin people have built on top of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is terrifyingly slow and inefficient to actually do anything except store. It's just not a payment system anymore. It can do large amounts, you can store it forever, it's great, but it's not going to be a payment system. So they've built a layer 2 thing. It's not a blockchain, it's a way of making fast transactions that zip around a network. I don't actually like the system very much, but I recognized one thing when I saw it. It is attracting vast amounts of venture capital money. It is attracting vast amounts of development because of that money. And countries like El Salvador have picked it as a national way to do payments. So I'm holding in my hand, for example, this is an NFC card. It's essentially, it acts exactly the way your debit card with Visa or MasterCard would work. You put it on a terminal that other people have built, and you can make payments for small amounts to buy coffee, to buy tea. And people are developing this, and the infrastructure is being built for these cards. We're not going to be able to get that money to build Hive. But with the addition of a simple gateway, which is what I've built, you'll be able to have one of these Lightning cards linked directly to your Hive account or to your HBD, and you'll spend HBD in a store with a tap. It will go through Lightning, it'll get paid out as Lightning, and you won't have to think about that. You'll still be storing Hive and HBD. And that's why I'm putting so much effort in to this bridge, because we'll stay using Hive, because I like the advantages of Hive. It's really nice to work with. But we will then get access to whatever these Lightning people build with their, Lightning Labs got a $70 million VC injection to build a kind of a wrapping for stable coins. I don't understand it. I don't see how it's going to work, but I don't care, because that much money going into a system means lots of development. And 99% of that development is open source. And with a simple bridge, we get to use it. So that's what I wanted to say about value for value. v4v.app, if you go to that app on your phones, generate a Lightning invoice and come find me, I will give you 1,500 sats immediately converted to Hive. So, have I still got some slides? Oops, I jumped. Okay. This man is famous in Holland in a way that most foreigners do not understand here. This man is, well, I asked this the last time, and the Dutch will also, he's Adam Curry. And he's an A-list celebrity in Holland, less so elsewhere, but he is the co-inventor of podcasting. And podcasting actually brings together what I'm doing with Value for Value at Lightning and what I'm going to talk about now, which is podping. Podping is harder to explain because it is not something that users or even podcast listeners should ever really need to know about. But it is transformational behind the scenes, and only Hive as a back end, as a platform, is where it could have been built. And this came about because this man co-invented podcasting. But then a few years after that, Steve Jobs phoned him up and said, can I put podcasting into the software on this thing I've got called an iPod? And Adam Curry took the meeting and said, yes. And he wound up giving Steve Jobs an index. And all that was a list of all the podcasts that existed in the world at that time. And Adam Curry, up to that point, had been running that list. He gave it to Apple, to Steve Jobs, and Apple have done a pretty good job of maintaining that list, curating that list, and acting as a central API, a way that if you develop a podcast listening app, if you want to find, if you want to present to your users a search box that says, I'd like to see the No Agenda show, you type No Agenda, and it would be Apple's API and Apple's computers for free that would give the list of all of the podcasts that had that search term. You would pick the one you want, you'd hit subscribe, and you'd be listening to No Agenda. But the trouble was, this man recognized, he got a fright when specifically Alex Jones was deplatformed. Alex Jones was deplatformed by Apple from the Apple podcast list and from YouTube and Facebook and Twitter pretty much simultaneously. And he didn't like the censorship aspect. It's not about the message of the person. It's about podcasting from its start was decentralized. Anybody could fire up a web server, host their podcast. But what had happened since he gave this to Apple, what had happened to the index was captured by Apple. And because all of the software, independent applications or big applications, even Spotify, a lot of it was pointing to Apple servers, he wanted to take that back. So he came up with this thing 2 years ago called Podcasting 2.0. So I'm Podcasting 2.0 certified. And I'm going to get to where one of the ideas that was missing, and when we got together as developers, and I just joined this group, this nebulous group, to look at ways that we can take back podcasting from Apple as a big index. Google has also got an index of podcasts now, Spotify do, but we wanted an independent one. So what Adam Curry did, I should go back. I'm still on Adam Curry. What he did, with a guy called Dave Jones, they founded their own index. They call it the Podcast Index, and it's independent. They have gathered together more than 4 million podcasts. They keep this index, and one of the most important jobs of an index is to figure out when a podcast has changed. And since podcasting was invented, the way that you do that is it's kind of like the child in the back of the car on a long journey. What does a child in the back of the car do on a long journey? Anybody know? Are we there yet? So the way to discover if a podcast has changed is to have a server reach out to where the podcast is hosted, pull down their feed and say, is anything different? Is anything different? And this happens, there are 4 million podcasts. So if you want to check every 10 minutes whether any one of those RSS feeds has changed, you need lots of computers continually polling. Now, some of those podcasts might not have changed in 2 years, But what happens when a 2-year-old podcast comes out with a new series? Well, did you check it for the last 2 years? How often did you check it? Did you check it every week? Did you check it every day, every hour? Some podcasts are daily, some podcasts are hourly. How do you, all over the world, and especially in Apple and Spotify and Google, there are tons of computers just, it's called polling, checking RSS feeds, and we wanted an alternative. Dave Jones, who works with Adam Curry, came up with an idea. He presented it to us, and it was horribly complicated. It involved running multiple servers all over the world. It didn't have any elegance. It wasn't decentralized. And it was going to mean that Podcast Index, Adam Curry's thing, was going to host this stuff. I looked at this and I thought, you know what? This is kind of like Splinterlands, actually, the problem here. It's like, how do I know when a game has started? If I want to track all the games on Splinterlands, I can. I just look at the Hive blockchain. I look for SM as a custom JSON, and I can see every single thing that's going on Splinterlands. I thought, I wonder if we can do that. So I used to be a coder. Many years ago, I got a PhD in physics writing code. And for 20 years, I'd hardly coded. I learned to code again to help Andrew with our case against Google and Facebook. And then I thought, I can do something. I can do something with Hive. I can say, you send a message just to Hive, one message when you've changed your podcast. You put it as a custom JSON on the Hive chain, and then any index will be able to watch just the Hive chain. They won't have to watch every one of 4 million RSS feeds. So I wrote the code. I literally wrote the code one night, showed it to them the next day, and oh, come on, clicker. It's been refined, and it turned into something called PodPing. PodPing is simply a way for the people who host podcasts. This is not the users, but big hosting companies, and there's a few like names like Transistor, BuzzFeed, Buzzsprout, Captivate. These are hosting companies. You might not have heard them, but they host a lot of podcasts. They have seen the value of this idea. They now have a way in which they can send a signal when one of their users updates a podcast, adds a new episode. As part of that process, they send out one signal that gets written as a custom JSON on Hive, and you can just see a scrolling list of every change to those, and it's now hundreds of thousands of podcasts that record every change. ThreeSpeak, for example, has become a podcast host. Every video on ThreeSpeak is a video podcast, and every time someone adds a ThreeSpeak episode, it gets written as a pod ping as a custom JSON onto the Hive blockchain. That's, if you're mystified as to what a custom JSON is, that's what one looks like. It's just a bit of data at the top that says, this is a pod ping, PP, podcast update. We have different reason codes there. You see, this one's podcast update. We have something coming, which I'm going to, but we can do music, we can do books, we can do podcasts, we can do blog posts. This is the start of being a global notification system for changes to RSS that has never existed before. There was something, because there's something called WebSub Hub and PubSub, but those wound up being centralized. It wound up being that Google was the major server provider that ran that, so we didn't like that. So that's why we came up with PodPing. It's been running for over a year now. It sends a few thousand PodPings, about a few thousand a day. It's still a tiny, I think it's 0.16% of the traffic that Splinterlands generates. So it's tiny, but it's working. And a growing cohort of the podcast industry behind the scenes is watching very closely this, Because eventually, one day, the goal is that Apple, instead of running banks of computers that check 4 million podcast RSS feeds every hour or 10 minutes or day, they should be watching Hive. They should install a tiny little bit of Java or a tiny bit of Python that just watches the Hive blockchain and notes when each one of these podcasts changes, instead of having to go out and actually list it. And the thing that is, RSS is beautifully decentralized, but so is pod ping on Hive. It's uncensorable in the same way. Anybody can send a pod ping. That's the format. Copy the format. You can send a pod ping. It just so happens that as part of Podcasting 2.0, we've written the software to make this easy, but you don't have to use our software. Okay. Now, this is where it gets new, and this has never been done before. This is what we call lit. This is where podcasts get lit. Lit means live item tag. Now, historically, podcasting was the antithesis of live. Podcasting was the way that Adam Curry invented to say, well, I want to put out a radio show, but I want you to be able to listen to it at any moment after I finish doing it. And that was purely because of the constraints of the internet in the day. The internet was too slow for live casting. You might take an hour and a half to download half an hour's worth of audio. Okay, but the internet's switched around now, and everybody's doing live shows. But how do you know when your favorite podcaster has gone live or is recording a show? Well, probably because you get a YouTube notification or a Twitch notification or a Facebook notification or a Twitter. All of these are different. All of them are proprietary, and none of them will share with the other. There's no single app that will let you know that someone on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube that you want to follow is going live. And this is, I think, one of the most jealously guarded bits of the technology stack today is going live notifications. So what do? We use the same pod ping infrastructure that says when a podcast has changed to say, okay, I am going live. So the one on the left here, it says podcast live. Feeds, na.shownotes.co.rss, that's the No Agenda show. That show has more than 1 million listeners, okay? And it's recorded live. So when Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak record the show, they record it as live. They don't do any editing afterwards. They go live, they record a 2.5-hour show with sound effects and jingles and all this stuff. It's live to tape is what it's called. That goes out on Hive. This thing here that's next to it is a notification in a new app called Podverse. Podverse runs a server as part of its application infrastructure. That server is watching the Hive blockchain. It's watching for that pod ping. When it sees a live notification, it looks at the RSS feed, it pulls certain information, and the screen on the right is how, if you click on that live notification, you get taken straight to the podcast, the No Agenda show, and if you can just see No Agenda episode 1458 live, there's a little live button. You hear it live. Now the point is, this is all open tech. Anyone can write another. In fact, that's not the only application right now. There's CurioCaster is also watching live notifications. Fountain is building this right now. There's a bunch of other new podcasting apps. You can find them at newpodcastingapps.com that are building in these features. I mean, I haven't even mentioned that you can also stream sats. You can send payments of small amounts of Bitcoin to the podcaster. You can hit boost. We're looking at ways to do open commenting, live commenting on a live show. So these are all features that you've got on YouTube, you've got on Twitch, but how can we do them in the open infrastructure way that it's a totally open protocol. Anyone can build an app that does this, and we bypass the gatekeepers. We bypass YouTube and Facebook and Twitch and Amazon, you know. Podping is a sort of it's a very subversive technology for this, because these people were very much convinced of Bitcoin as the only thing. They didn't really want to hear about other blockchain technologies. But having what we have on Hive, which is this very fast, distributed, permissionless database that's not free to use, not totally free. I've invested my time, I got some money from the DHF initially. Those are the resources that are dedicated to Podping to making it work. We're paying for the infrastructure, but in a way that isn't per transaction. There's nothing else like this. Hive is unique. And the reason it got adopted so quickly by Adam Curry and Dave Jones was because I could show them a demo of it working with it. I didn't even propose it, actually. I never even told them. I just went away, built it, showed them. And that's so powerful. And it's the last thing I'm going to say, because it's take an idea. If you can't build it yourself, get onto Hive, right on the developer board. You say, look, I've got this really cool idea. Can you tell me how to do this? We need more ideas of what to do. Hive is so amazing. We're looking all the time for ideas of what to do. And don't think that we haven't thought of everything. We haven't. So come up with the ideas, and we will find, I'm sure, people to help you build those. Or, do what I did and reinvigorate old skills and come back to life and become a developer again. So anyway, that's where I'm going to end. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Yes. Oh, number 4. Oh, ja, I grabbed the wrong one. Ik heb ze altijd weer zien.
Hello. I have a podcast, and one of the problem that I have is like, in every platform they have the metrics of the KPI, but none of them are together. Like I cannot compare how is my podcast performing in Apple Podcast and another platform, for example. Is your platform gonna put all the data together, and then I can see all the platform how it's performing, or the same podcast performing everywhere?
Podping isn't going to do anything for that. It is going to provide the industry with some interesting information of how often shows update. But while I've been here, something amazing has happened back on the podcastindex.social, and there is something coming about open, properly anonymized, cross-host statistics. So watch this space. Keep in touch with me. Yeah. Something's going to come for that, but what I've built isn't the solution. But what Podping will be, but I need help with front ends and stuff. The data of Podping is all stored on the chain immutably for over a year now. There's masses of mining of statistics, and I think HAF is going to play a major role in us being able to access that. And the podcasting world, when I show them the statistics, it won't be who's listening, but it is going to be to do with who's publishing and when they publish. That stuff's going to drop out of what we've built.
I have another one. You mentioned that when we create video on 3-speed, you automatically have a podcast, right?
Yep, I'm going to
Okay.
yeah.
But my question is like a creator, sometimes I create video tutorial that is not a podcast. So when the consumer or the listener going to listen the podcast, they cannot understand what I'm showing because it's a tutorial. I'm showing something on my website, on my computer.
Podcasting is video too. Not very many people know this. If you load your podcast on 3Speak in Apple's podcasting app, you will see video. It's unbelievable, but it's true. You can watch 3Speak videos in the podcasting app on an Apple phone. I'll show you.
Okay, thank you.
So this will just show my ignorance of podcasting in general, but is there some kind of tagging system, and is that something that could be included into these pings?
There is already a tagging system. I mean, podcasting relies on the RSS feed as being the source of truth. So everything you need to know about a podcast is in the RSS feed. So actually, we send out the minimum amount of information in a pod ping. And the minimum information is, this is the RSS feed, it changed. We give a reason why it changed. Is it a live or is it an update?
So you would look up the RSS
But
to
then,
get the tags.
Exactly, because we don't, that was a very conscious decision because I was always looking, how can we store the minimum on Hive?
Sure, that makes perfect sense. But if somebody wanted to then, so somebody could build a half app, for instance, that would then go fetch the RSS feed and then generate the tags into their local database and have a searchable, taggable
That's
system.
actually what Podcast Index does today. When they see a podcast has changed, that just kicks off the process of downloading the RSS feed and indexing the new item that has been added. And that's how that Podcast Index is not the only one. There's at least 3 other indexes that use PodPing. And so, for example, if you publish a brand new show, what you have to do at present is you have to go and tell Apple what's your show. You have to tell Spotify what's your show. What the more progressive podcast indexes are doing is they just watch PodPing. If they see an RSS feed that they've never seen before, they index it for the first time and add it to their list. But the point is we don't store much information in Hive. We just store the link to the RSS feed because that's the source of truth.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that makes perfect sense.
Thanks. Yes? Yes? Okay, last question by Starkers.
Hello.
Hello.
Congrats, Brian. I think what
Thanks.
you're doing is amazing. I just want to say, I consume a lot of 3Speak content on my Apple podcast, and it's fantastic to just plug the RSS feed into Apple Podcasting and get auto notifications, auto updates, everything about all the 3Speak content on Apple Podcasts. I think it's great. So good shout out to that, Brian. I really appreciate that. The question I've got for you is regards to decentralizing. It's more for the value stuff that you're doing, because you're kind of the key channel through to the Lightning Network for those payments. But I heard you mention about decentralizing that and letting other people run infrastructure. Any comments on that and when it's going to happen, things like that?
That's what I'm presently funded to do. I keep getting sidetracked by interesting stuff, but my long-term goal is I don't want to be the live Lightning bridge, Hive Lightning bridge. I want that to be decentralized. Not massively decentralized. We don't need hundreds, but we need 4 or 5, and we need a round-robin system. So that's what I'm working on. I am. Hopefully, I don't know whether I'll get it by December when my current funding runs out. It turns out it's a harder problem than I thought it was. He knows, because I've got to teach other people to run a service that I've built just for me. But I will do it. I'm sure I will. It's a goal I've set myself, so I can't fail.
All right. Thanks a lot, Brian. Thank you so much.